Welcome to AI Now with Oracle, a series where we explore the world of enterprise artificial intelligence and its impact on the world of work. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the latest trends, breakthroughs, and considerations surrounding AI technology. Whether you're an AI enthusiast, a business leader, or just curious about the future, this series is for you. I'm Miranda Nash, Group Vice President, Oracle AI, and this week I'm welcoming Lareina Yee, Senior Partner at McKinsey, to discuss how humans can work together with AI to fuel productivity, especially amidst disruption. Before we dive in, just some quick housekeeping notes. Feel free to use whatever platform you're tuning in on to ask all your burning AI questions or provide your own examples of ways you've seen humans working with AI to fuel productivity. We'll do our best to respond to as many of your questions as possible. And who knows, maybe your inquiries or comments will even inspire one of our upcoming episodes. Okay, let's get into it. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Lareina Yee.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So before we get into it, obviously our audience knows McKinsey, but can you share a little bit about your role there?
Sure. I have had the pleasure of spending 25 years at McKinsey, all in technology. And I feel like I've gone through all of the technology transitions. I think you and I both share that kind of hardware to software, perpetual to SaaS, and now AI. For the last 5 years, I've been leading all of our frontier tech research and really witnessing this compression of time where things seemed like they were, far away, and now they are here. And the one that is most here is AI. And so I spend my time with that. And I also lead our technology alliances globally.
Speaking of AI and this time compression, like you said, and as well, all the uncertainties that are out there now. One thing I hear from customers sometimes, and you might say it's the conventional wisdom, when there's so much uncertainty, let's wait and see. Wait and see about AI, see how things play out. What do you think about that conventional wisdom?
I would like to challenge that right off the bat. So here's the reason. Conventional wisdom is conventional. And if you want to win, if you want to be distinctive, you need to be more than conventional. And I think this is not a time you can play it safe in terms of the types of bets that you're making in terms of technology. And you would say, why? And for this, I kind of look back in history and you say, well, the internet, it took 10, 20 years to fully get all of that value. Even when we think about telecom infrastructure, it took time. Even the iPhone, that took time, even though that felt like such a moment. But if you actually look at what's going on now with AI, it is happening so much faster. And the simple thing that I have noticed that over the last 3 years, even though we're not at AGI, we have all the tools we need for businesses, and they are transparent and they're right in front of us. So by not acting, you're basically waiting for your competitor or a startup to take those same tools and to create the value.
Absolutely. That's certainly what we hear from our CEO, Safra Katz. In times of uncertainty is exactly the time to be bold and to lead through that change as well, right? As leaders, I know you speak to a lot of leaders about what change means.
This is a time where you can get competitive distance. There's that kind of the race car analogy or that saying that it's in the moments of rain, not in sun, where you actually see that distance. And so I think right now is that time. And, when we look back in technology history, it was during these times that the largest companies were born that we enjoy today. This is when the Facebooks and the Googles and the Amazons said, wait a second, I don't have to build or operate the way that people expect. I could create something net new.
It's very powerful, and of course, a powerful motivator to those of us who are established businesses and facing this change. One of the reasons I was so interested to have you on as a guest, Lareina, is because of the work McKinsey does around, the macroeconomic and geopolitical situation. And we are facing so many different types of disruption right now. And I'd love it if you could maybe kind of articulate what some of those factors are that lead to this just generalized kind of unsettling feeling many of us have?
So on the one hand, while we just talked about how we should lean forward on technology, and I am a huge technology optimist. So, at the same time, I don't think 6 months ago we could have predicted going into this year with so much macro uncertainty. And so, if you have a seat of leadership, is this a hard moment? 100%. This is a really hard moment. And there are incredibly practical things. So you're thinking about employment, you're thinking about inflation, you're thinking about tariffs. And the list goes on. You're also thinking the kind of geopolitical centers of power are shifting or they're more uncertain. You may be also thinking about sources of energy. And so I think the list that, kind of keeps us up at night, or, our worry list or the uncertainty list, is significant.
We talk about people, process, and technology, right? And zeroing when you're dealing with times of change, but when you zero in on that technology and how technology can support us in these times of disruption, do you have examples for where sort of AI has been that force for kind of stabilizing or managing the volatility?
There are so many different examples. I think when you think about AI, I think of two types of ways that you can apply it. One way is you can make existing work better, more efficient, faster, reduce the cost of it. And a lot of that is what we've seen. So there's something I'm doing, maybe I'm managing my supply chain, I'm managing an information flow, I can make that better. Or even in our consumer lives, like I can do research faster and better using it like a deep research function. So there are things that you can do in category one, which is making existing work better. And by the way, we do need that right now. That's productivity. But the piece that's also really exciting is category two. Category two is work we couldn't have done otherwise. And that's also kind of the realm of possibility right now. And so for me, I think both of those are really important. So if you're managing multiple and very complex scenarios, in some ways, AI technology is really helpful for actually managing all of that information. That would be one kind of incredibly practical, simple way. If you are managing fluctuations across your supply chain of all these different prices, all these different contracts, it's just an enormous amount of structured and unstructured data. In some ways, how can AI help you? And I'm not suggesting that AI replace all the judgment and all the things that we put on top of it, but it may allow you to do things faster and different. And we're also seeing that in medical research, in life sciences, in software. In kind of all of the sets of things that are kind of the core of what we do, we see those possibilities. But the first piece is leadership. You have to actually give the permission space to say, how can I use this technology in ways that create efficiencies in what we do today or create new forms of work and answers?
I like the way you frame that with the productivity, number one, and number two, tackling problems we didn't even attempt before. And, at Oracle, we certainly see 2025 as the year of the agent. And, agents really, we believe, will help to unlock that number two, right? The opportunities that we didn't even attempt to automate before. And now with that versatility, we have that option. So now when I go around talking to audiences about agents, one of my favorite references is the Superagency report that you worked on, that you led at McKinsey. And there's just so much richness there in terms of, again, how you basically use agents to achieve this super agency for humans. I think it's so interesting. But could you just maybe summarize for everyone who hasn't read that report what super agency is all about?
Absolutely. So we teamed up with Reid Hoffman. So that's kind of his notion. And we kind of drafted off of that inspiration. And what Reid was kind of the original premise of this is, what if everything were possibly to go right? And I just think the permission space to think about that for a second. If everything in AI goes right, what are the possibilities of how we think about work, life, all of these things? And our super agency report really focuses on the business sector to say, if everything went right with the technologies we have today, suspension of disbelief. I mean, certainly there are lots of important things that gives you pause, but if it were to go right, how could you start to re-envision work? And what does that look like? And so that was kind of the genesis of it. And in the Superagency report, one of the interesting things that we found is that whilst 92% of companies say that they are going to invest more in the next 2 or 3 years, they're all planning to increase their Gen AI specific investments. Actually, only 1% said that they were at AI scale. So one of the things we ended up spending some time on is really understanding this delta between the potential and the actual. And we found that, a little under 50% of companies were saying that they have most of their AI investments still in pilot. And, for all of us who really spend a lot of time in technology, we know that the economic benefits, the productivity, the business benefits, they come when you get beyond the pilot. So, that is definitely, even though that's kind of not the core thing that we were originally looking at, it became one of the key insights is how do you cross that chasm from pilot to production to scale where you start to get those benefits.
Yeah, I mean, the proof of concept purgatory, you might say,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Pilot purgatory.
Yeah.
Stranded investments. And as you and I both know, having spent so much time in the industry, you start to get worried about shelfware, about, new AI tech debt, all these things that you're like, oh, no, that does not sound good.
All right. It's terrible for vendors. It's not good for customers. So, I'll give you our point of view, and I'd like to hear what you think, what you recommend to customers. But basically, one thing we've experienced is that by embedding AI and just making it part of the flow of work that exists today within the applications customers already know, this is kind of an easier way for them to get started, for them to ramp up their governance processes and make sure that works, for them to, start to kind of inculcate amongst their employees and really start to think in a kind of an iterative way, which is new for a lot of companies. What are other approaches to, like you said, bridging that chasm, or what have you seen work well?
Yeah, there are a couple things. One is, I think where you're going is kind of the ubiquity of AI. And, I was having a conversation this morning with a software company, and I was like, look, I don't think it has to be a software company. It could be, a retail company. It could be a financial services company. But in many ways, one of the powerful things to think about is 2 axes of change. One, how do you use AI to innovate your products and services for your customers? And 2, how do you use AI to reinvent your internal processes? And those are 2 incredibly powerful axes. And when you start to think about it at that strategic level, one of the things that will happen is you'll start to kind of go from like, this is a feature, so to speak, to this is actually something transformative. And, it's interesting because what we know is that the total potential economic value is 4.4 trillion. The other thing, you and I have talked about this before, is like the pilot purgatory. If you were to go and like touch all those pilots and be like, let me go find and wrangle you pilots up, most of them are kind of out there without a business case. You will find that if it's stranded, it likely doesn't have a sponsor, doesn't have a business objective, isn't laddering to something aspirational, doesn't have a target or financial metric or some kind of accountability. And I think it's not okay just to sort of have AI for AI's sake. That's very expensive. It actually needs to be harnessed and focused on the areas that matter for the business.
On the business, yeah, sure. Back to ROI, and
exactly.
Even no matter what the I is, we really need to focus on the R, or the value, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we should be critical. We should absolutely, as leaders, say, that's great. We've got 100 pilots. Fabulous. I don't know, should we have 20? Should we have 400? That's not the point. The point is, where's the R, just as you were saying? And which ones are valuable? And let's invest in those.
So beyond the pilots and getting into production, when you did the Superagency research, what did you find in terms of, what's the productivity upside we can expect?
maybe to zoom out a little bit, we've been looking at the economic potential of automation technology since 2017. And one of the remarkable things that we found is that the introduction of generative AI basically pulls forward what we call the midpoint of getting that value forward by about 10 years. And so, the overall size of that, as we've talked about, is 4.4 trillion. And capturing that is moving faster. So I think that's kind of just framing one thing. It's sort of the macro. And, then when you look at the individual person, one of the things that is really interesting to me is in that same research report that we did as the McKinsey Global Institute, we found that on average, jobs will find between 60 and 70% of their activities could be automated with generative AI and automation technology. So that's like a lot. Like if you think of our work, that's a lot of my activities. It's not 100%, so it's not my whole job, but it's a significant amount. And then as we kind of unpack that further, one of the things in the Superagency report is we wanted to understand, well, what, like if we took a dipsy stick, what are people's views on what they're expecting against those big numbers? And what surprised me is the vast majority of employees were saying, I expect that up to 30% of my work will be automated by generative AI over the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, that is, that expectation, almost that built-in assumption, is a really remarkable thing, given that this technology has only kind of come into commonplace over the last 2 or 3 years. And so I think if we kind of zoom back, when we look at the technology's capabilities to change work, I mean, it is profound. But then when we go to the micro and the individual, we see that the average employee already sees it. The person who may not be seeing it is the leader.
And it's interesting, the 4 areas you mentioned. I mean, one of the areas that wasn't in your list was sort of back office productivity enhancements. And certainly we're seeing that that's a relatively easy way for companies to make progress. We do it internally at Oracle. That's where our customers, of course, of Fusion applications get
absolutely.
a lot of value.
I love that one. And, there's one case that a CTO shared with me that and they came up with it, so all the credit goes to them. But they are a CPG company, and they have, you can just imagine how many contracts they have in procurement, right? Mm-hmm. So, procurement, maybe not your first most sexy answer, apologies for procurement people out there. But what they realized was they had a Scrum team work on this, and they realized that of all their contracts, they were paying a lot of money in penalties, but you couldn't catch them. And so what they used is they created Gen AI knowledge solution that went through all these contracts, right? Which would take human hours. I mean, I couldn't even count them. Mm-hmm. And they ended up saving so much money directly to the bottom line. And they were not even changing their relationship with their suppliers. They were just not making mistakes.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Isn't it? It's so practical.
Yeah, very practical.
And what I loved is they said, so we spotlighted the procurement team as like kind of, the innovation of the moment or, whatnot. And can you imagine like how fun that is to be like, this is so practical. Yeah. And it's like, it's such a win-win.
Yeah, that I spoke with a customer recently who had the similar experience with their accounts payable department.
Well, exactly.
And the accounts payable became heroes. They were returning money back to the business in, ways that, others hadn't made as fast progress. So that's
great. The other thing is, for a lot of us who spent a lot of time in tech, a lot of it was the complexity of creating technology. But one of the most amazing things I find, and I wonder if you find this too with AI, is from a user perspective. It's easy to be a power user. And one of the benefits of that is that the procurement team could become the most innovative, the manager in procurement could become the most innovative rock star in delivering bottom line impact, or the CEO. And so the idea that you can also source from your own company and talent more ideas, I like that one a lot.
Well, that reminds me of another point from the Superagency report about kind of the dichotomy, I guess, between leadership and individuals on the ground and the gap there with AI. Can you tell us more about that?
So this one, and I had that exact expression when we looked at the data. So one of the things is we were like, if we take a tenure cut and a generation cut and a role cut. What are the different attitudes about AI? And, what do people think? What do they expect? And I assumed millennials, and wrongly, we'll get to the punchline, that millennials maybe are the most resistant to AI. Basically, the punchline, what we found is that employees were far more likely than their leaders to already assume that 30% or more of their activities in their current job would be radically changed by AI over the next 2 to 3 years. Employees were already teaching themselves how to use the tools on their own in their consumer lives. And even if they weren't fans of AI, they felt actually pretty competent because they were figuring out and teaching themselves. And the number one thing they were asking from their employers was more investment in them to be able to use these, to have the agency to drive their jobs and to sort of learn the new skills. And so what was really interesting is kind of the punchline of that is your employees are ready. They're actually taking initiative across all the generations, from sort of your youngest members, your Gen Zs, all the way up to your millennials, who oftentimes are your managers, kind of waiting for you. And the laggards were the top leaders.
You find that just giving people the opening. So as an example, we just had sponsored an internal agent hackathon over the last couple of weeks, and 1,200 agents, we did not expect that at all, were created over that hackathon period. Just, again, opening up to innovation, giving people the opportunity to use that spark that's there already.
And I think that also, I love that story. It takes some of the personal risk and fear away. Mm-hmm. And it gives people that sense of confidence and empowerment from the technology. I mean, you kind of imagine, and you mentioned agents, which, just to pause for folks who may not be technical, the agent is the ability to take an action with AI. And I mean, it's amazing. Like when I started in technology, I could never have imagined that's possible. And with agents, like imagine if each of us had a team of 4 or 5 agents doing different things, different tasks, and helping us be more successful. Or also taking the toil, the sort of more transactional layer of our jobs away in a good way, because then we would have more time for the things that we crave. And I also think that is very related to a leadership moment, which is if you can create a surplus with AI of time, how do you want to use it? Do you want to give it to the bottom line? For sure. Do you want to help grow? Do you also want to change the way that people use their time in higher quality ways? It's a great question.
So you're hitting on a lot of AI and human. I mean, this is the theme, one of the themes we're talking about. Do you have any examples from industries or specific functions where you've really seen that AI agent and human interaction achieve really remarkable things?
I love to play with all the models. And one of the things, as many of them have different audio and it's like the latency's nice and low now, you can actually have a conversation. I feel like, you can learn things. Like it's a different way to learn. Like, gosh, I'd like to know X. And then, you start having conversation, you learn something. And so just even the idea of, informal learning, which then when we look at the enterprise, you talk to CHROs, and some of the most forward CHROs are being very radical and saying, how would I use this to really help onboard and help improve how employees feel, connected culture information, and, could you have a kind of an AI buddy with you as you're going through your career? And not all of this is in production, not all of it's there, it's still early, but you are reconceptualizing a basic human experience, which is, how do I start at a new company?
Oh yeah, and assisting managers, new managers, having a coach to talk through difficult situations, get to role play, for example. So there's so much power in an HR context. No question.
I mean, how many times have you been nervous? I mean, I admit, sometimes you have to give a harder conversation. You're a little nervous. Like it'd be great to kind of role play that first with AI. Get a little bit more prepped and then have the conversation. And that's not about replacing the human conversation. It's about making it better.
Make it better. Absolutely. I mean, look, one of the other themes here we're talking about is disruption, right? Do you have any other examples where agents have been, employed really to deal with these different disruptions, or to maybe, tamper down the volatility that so many are experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many use cases, but I think we can't have this conversation without talking about coding, right? So, I mean, obviously now everybody likes to talk about vibe coding, but just all the coding assistance and ways in which you can reconceptualize that. I think that has just been such a great use case that we're seeing across not just tech companies, but also all companies. And in fact, actually outside of Silicon Valley, most companies, if you asked them a couple of years ago, what's the talent you wish you had more of? They would say, gosh, if you could lend me a couple of Oracle engineers, I'd be so grateful, right? I'm sure you've heard that all the time, is engineering talent. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that you can use all of these coding tools to get real leverage, this, I think, is a huge unlock. And, a lot of companies are finding and posting about 30%, which is also what I'm seeing in my clients, about a 30% time saved, which then you say, how can I use that capacity in one of the most scarce and important roles that I have? And so I think what we're seeing in software engineering is pretty amazing.
This has been such a good, interesting conversation. And I always like to wrap up with the AI Now theme and ask folks what they've, been experiencing with AI. But maybe for you, having such a broad context, let's broaden it. What would you want to leave people with here?
I feel like people should use AI every day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have access to all of it within your company, utilize all of that. And if you can proactively, if you're a manager, if you can proactively sign up to take your group to be one of the early pods, do it. Because for me, I feel like, we may have grown up thinking, well, technology is the technologist. And then I'm, the salesperson, or I'm the product person, or, I'm the merchandiser, whatever it is. But to me, technology is part of every job. And so the idea of how you bring that into your daily living and learning, that's really important. If you don't have access in your company, then I think, obviously you have to keep all your company information secure there. But I think there's so much consumer accessibility. And you can use deep research tools on any of the LLMs. And it's just, I would just say, try deep research. It's extraordinary. Mm-hmm. It's extraordinary. So I feel it's kind of like, an apple, every day keeps the doctor away. Use AI every day.
Use AI every day. And it's open to all of us, right? This is kind of a empowering technology that's here for everyone.
Yeah.
Lareina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Miranda.
And thank you for tuning in. If you want more updates, musings, and AI news, make sure to subscribe to Oracle's YouTube channel and follow us on social media. See you next time.